Welcome to the Chronobreak podcast. I'm Snnuy.
And I'm Vlad the Lad.
And we're finally here with our 10th episode. And because we've been running for a little longer now, we are going to take on a topic that is a little more serious and a little more relevant to what Runeterra is going through right now. We're going to talk about how our favorite card game compares to other card games like Hearthstone, like Magic, like Pokemon, like anything else that we have played in the past and have experience with. And we're going to just see how certain topics like monetization, gameplay, how all of that does against those other card games. Vlad, I would like you to talk about the topics of the Runeterra reveal trailer that they mentioned, because you made a beautiful list of notes. You always come prepared, and I just make mental notes. So I'll leave this one to you because you did all the work.
Well, all the work, to be fair, but I want to start with the top 4 problems that they mentioned in their very first reveal trailer when they started announcing the Legends of Runeterra, which was the main problem: paycheck to try a new deck. Like, you have to pay a lot to actually get new deck, new cards, super high RNG to decide the game, that metas are solved way too quickly, and that the cards stay broken for way too long. And we want to talk about these things in regards to also other card games, how they are doing, and if they lift up to their goals. This is what we will answer at the end.
Yep. So to kick it off, let's just start, I guess, with the single most important topic, and that is, of course, gameplay. I want to let you start. So I guess the best thing to do is just talk about what you think about Runeterra gameplay and how it compares to gameplay in other card games that you have experience with. You already said that you played Magic a long time ago. I probably played a little more Hearthstone than you, so we're going to try to keep it close to home and take a stance on card games we have experience with. So if you want to start with gameplay.
Yeah, like in general, I would mainly compare also Magic and Hearthstone and Runeterra, because those are the main 3 that I played for a long time. And I would say that in regards of gameplay, in terms of complexity, that it's right between those two. Like, Hearthstone was a little, at least back in the day when I was playing it, a little too simple, a little too under complex, too high RNG. And MTG was like the thing from back in the day, right? This was from 1990, I think, this is when I started making cards. And so the card pool is just immense and huge, and you can't see the whole picture there if you don't invest like hours and hours and weeks of investigation. So I think Legends of Runeterra is right in the middle spot, where it's between complexity and between, like, still being accessible for newer players, I guess. So to wrap up the general things. In terms of similarities, because you have to know that if you make a new card game like Legends of Runeterra, you still are kind of bind to this whole CCG world, right? So you have similarities in the mana system, for example, that would be similar to Hearthstone. So you get 1 mana gem each round, and then everything just costs mana, right? Compared to MTG, where you actually have the mana in the cards, like, you have to draw them first, and you have to play them, and you tap them. Like, they go in, the resources are in the game, and you have to spend special resources and not like any resource that is for every card, right? So this is sort of a different thing there. In regards to the attack block system, it's similar to MTG as well. Like, you have you declare the attackers normally, then the enemy declares the blockers. In Hearthstone, you don't have that. If it's your turn, you attack what you want, right? If the enemy doesn't have a taunt unit, you can attack right face. This was something that threw me off completely when I was playing Hearthstone at first. Like, you can block what? You attack my face right away. That was really weird. So there are some different things there. Maybe you want to take away what's different there. What's very different in, like, terms of I don't know, the mana system, because I said the similarities. What would be different?
First of all, the card game I played by far the most before Runeterra's Hearthstone.
Yeah.
I played that nonstop. And when I switched to Runeterra, the first thing that really caught my attention was banking mana. I never played any card game that had that kind of system, and it entirely changed the card game, like just the archetype that you can play that are viable, and just card games in general are completely different because of banking mana. You're no longer like, it's no longer just game over if you don't have a 1-drop against an aggressive deck, because you can save your mana and, like, I don't know, on turn 2, maybe play like a Val Feast plus a 1-drop that you just top decked, and it makes all the difference instead of only being able to play the Val Feast or just the 1-drop to block an aggressive unit. I think that really is such a big deal for card games, the banking mana, and it makes games so much more interesting because the game doesn't just end if you miss your early curve. And that also maybe that changes how many cards you can put in your deck even, because I know for Hearthstone it is 30, and the smaller the deck list, the more consistent your deck is going to be because the higher the chance that you're going to draw the right card. But Runeterra is 40. And that is honestly a lot more. That's also like kind of balanced by the fact that you can put 3 copies of each card in your deck, and Hearthstone only has 2. But just the fact that the deck list is bigger, but still you have more ways to play and to play out your game plan because of that bank mana. And I really think that that is by far the biggest difference, and also makes the game very appealing to newer players because if I just start Hearthstone and I just get run over by aggressive decks and I don't have the cards, like I just have like vanilla stats, and if I don't get those early enough, then I will lose every single game. But with banking mana, you can play every single game out in at least until turn 3, where it matters that you actually start playing your unit mana or your spell mana, so you don't waste mana. But until then, it's just it's everything goes basically.
I think before you go on with the next point, I think this was the single most refreshing and interesting gameplay thing that I was first playing Legends of Runeterra. I was blown away by this because, like you say, you have this really shitty hand, you draw badly. It's a card game after all, so you are bound to RNG, and if you don't have those early plays, you are straight up fucked. And it still goes with Legends of Runeterra, even though you have that thing. Sometimes you would just draw your 4 drops and not a 1, 2, or 3 drop, right? So after the 3rd round, this is like the last chance to not burn mana effectively. So and it even makes it so that with this banked spell mana, you have the opportunity to like kind of naturally ramp into spells. This is also something other card games don't have, and I really like that mechanic, and that you have access to things like Lux, for example, and this 6 mana archetype, and that this is a thing, and also makes it way easier for control players, because control players would always not have an early play, so they can just pass and pass and pass, and then on turn 3 onwards, then you have a problem. But up to that point, you just look what the enemy does, and you can react to it without feeling bad and passing.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because I feel like the fact that we have back mana also makes it easier for control decks to not go overboard with healing. The primary control decks in Hearthstone are Priest and Warrior. Warrior gets a ton of armor. Priest gets a ton of health to stabilize the games. But control decks have an easier time stabilizing because of back mana. So they don't have to play their 1-drops, their 2-drops. They could just actually fill their deck with more control tools and more late game bombs, what makes them a control deck, of course. Obviously, there are healing cards. There's like Val Feast that drains 1. There's Catalyst. There's Grass that actually was a playable card back in the day, But you don't...
Undergrowth.
Yeah, exactly. That's another really good one. But in Hearthstone, I feel like it's simply not possible to play late game bombs if you don't have any stabilizing, like armor, like health. But Runeterra, that's less important because of back mana, and you can just pass until you need to react, and then late game you just start winning. Of course, there's a lot of intricacies there, depending on what deck you're playing against, because obviously a control deck playing Avalanche against a small card like Ranger's Resolve will just blow out a game if you can't board clear. So there are still mind games there. It's not like control just gets a free pass into late game. They actually do have to try to win, but banking mana makes all the difference. Another interesting gameplay difference is, of course, the big one, the one that Runeterra kind of praised itself on, is interaction. Hearthstone is turn by turn, and when it's opponent's turn, you get nothing. You don't get any actions. There's nothing you can do. If they want to kill you, you have to let them. If somebody wants to kill you in Runeterra with an atrocity, well, if you have a freeze, then you can stop them. There is a lot of ways to actually kind of forge your own game plan based on what your opponent plays. Whereas Hearthstone, I feel like it's even. I know it's a meme in Runeterra where it's like, if they have it, they have it. But in Hearthstone, that is basically the only way to play the game. I know in Runeterra, it's like, yeah, okay, I'm just going to spend my mana. I'm not going to save mana for the answer. If they have atrocity, they have it. I'm not going to save mana for my freeze. But in Hearthstone, you simply don't even get that choice. If you're dead, you're dead. So interaction is a really big one too.
Yeah, like this is also something I totally adore from Legends of Runeterra, and we talked about this in the recent podcast that I was a little sad that they took that away a little with this cast play merge, so you can't really interact with that anymore to an extent. But there's still a lot of interactability compared to Hearthstone, for example, where you can do nothing at all, like you say. To compare it with MTG, there are possibilities, like you still can play spells. I think you can't play units, but you can play spells. So you have still counterspell is like one of the most known spells, which literally counters a spell from the enemy.
Who would have thought?
Mostly run exactly, mostly run by the color blue, which is similar to Ionia, because Ionia is all of this interactions with the enemy and like playing with him a little and reacting and stuff. And I mean, deny is basically counterspell period. So, but a little more powerful because you can also stop skills from the enemy units. So this would be that. But this back and forth thingy is what's Legends of Runeterra is all about. Like people even draw cards, both of them. Like in MTG wouldn't do that. Only the player that has a turn will draw a card, and in Legends of Runeterra every player draws a card every turn. So this is also something very different. This opens up so many things, like those mind games that you play, where you say, like you said, does the enemy have this atrocity? Do I need to keep my mana up for this freeze to stop him doing that? You always have to plan ahead how much mana you have and what you can play this turn. So this determines even your very first play within a turn. And I think this is something which makes it more complex, but also more fun to play in general.
Yeah, it is actually interesting because I feel like one thing that is like a result of that interaction is that blowouts are a lot more likely. Like especially if we're talking about atrocity and freezing. If I'm trying to atrocity for lethal and my opponent freezes that minion and it goes to 0, I still kill my unit. It just does 0 damage. In Hearthstone, a blowout is considered like a board clear that you can't come back from. Like if opponent spends all their mana on a board clear, then the opponent goes into their next turn and has to redevelop. Whereas in Hearthstone, that turn doesn't even end. In Runeterra, that turn doesn't even end. They can redevelop after that board clear. So, if you blow your Ruination too early and the opponent still has 8 mana, they're just going to refill the board, So, interaction can also make the game a lot harder to play. But overall, I guess that is a good thing. But again, it makes blowout just that much more painful, from my experience.
Yeah. And if you do that to like redeveloping when you have a blowout, you still are threatening lethal by a lot. Like if the enemy has full mana and you pay this ruination, you only have that 9 mana. Your turn is done, and the enemy has 9 other mana to redevelop, and then you can open attack without the enemy having another powerful spell. Like open attacking is also something very important, which defines Legends of Runeterra, in my opinion. What other card games don't have. Like almost all the interactions that you have, if you have any, like in Hearthstone you don't, but if you have any, you would have them anyways, right? So there are instants and there are sorceries. I think sorceries is something you can only play on your turn, and instants is what you can also play on the enemy turn. So while MTG only has 2 speeds, spell-wise, in Legends of Runeterra I think there are 4. So we have Focus, we have Burst, we have Slow, and we have Fast. And so that's that, and the interactability is always there. Like if you have instant, you can play this even on his open attack. Like if the enemy attacks or not, it's makes no difference, right? If you open attack or not. And in Legends of Runeterra it really does.
Yeah. I may be like getting ahead of our topic a little bit. I'm not sure if we put this in, but one thing that people talk about is that Runeterra is not that exciting to watch, like especially tournaments. Which, when you compare that to Hearthstone, which I honestly don't think it's that much bigger than the big Runeterra tournaments. But what I think is interesting is that in Hearthstone, every turn there is one player spending 10 mana at the latest turn, right? In Runeterra, on turn 10, assuming both players have 3 spell mana, there's 13 mana to spend for both players, so that's 26 in total. You would think that the games are more exciting with that much more mana flying around and that many more abilities and stuff, but for some reason, there's still that argument that, Hearthstone is more fun to watch. And I get that it's more viewer-friendly because it's easier to see what's going on. I think Runeterra has some issues there. Like, for example, in Runeterra's hand, it's harder to see what card the opponent is or what each player is holding and what the card does than it is in Hearthstone. I think Hearthstone does that really well. Just readability is great in Hearthstone. Yeah, that's something entirely different. Just thought it was interesting to bring that up. That at later turns there's 26 mana to spend instead of just one player spending 10. But
yeah. I think the main point why it's more boring to watch that is probably because there is this not committing, right? If you commit, you put yourself in a vulnerable spot, and you don't want to do that, especially not if you are on a big tournament, everybody's watching. You don't want to do mistakes, right? So you would most of the time then pass and do it the safe route and play around all the cards that the enemy potentially has. And you very rarely go for the proactive play that is risky with a high risk, high reward maybe. Maybe you even have lethal with it. But most of the time you would only pull that off if the enemy is actually threatening you with a lethal and you come into big problems where, maybe next turn the enemy has Mana for Ruination, I now have to go in, and even if I lose my board with this action.
Yeah, I guess for a player, or for a viewer rather, it's harder to understand those type of plays. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly why Runeterra is probably not as exciting to play, because it's harder to commit. Whereas in Hearthstone, you just have 10 mana, the enemy player can't interact because it's your turn, so it's easier to just go all out and try to win that way. That's a really good point. That's very fair. Actually, never thought about it that way, but that really hit the nail right on the head on why Runeterra might not always be the most exciting card game to watch. But yeah, agreed.
Even though there's another thing where we come to in a second, and I will bring that up again, what we talked about a second ago. But regarding deck building, I think there's also another different thing. You already said in Hearthstone there are 30 cards. In Legends of Runeterra we have 40, and in MTG, for example, it would be 60. So, like I said, you have your resources in your deck, so you have lands. And you have to play them. They can play one land per turn. And if you don't have any lands, you're fucked. So this is also a different thing from in terms of RNG. And like you said, the bigger the deck, the bigger the RNG. So you would fill your deck with 20 lands normally, and then with 40 normal cards. You can also differ. You can put less lands in the deck, but then you are less likely to draw resources, which you really need. So you can go with different strategies there. But this makes it way more RNG heavy, right? But also you have to keep in mind that in MTG, I think you can put 4 copies of each card in the deck. And in Legends of Runeterra it would be 3. I think in Hearthstone it was only 2.
Yeah, and for legendary cards it's 1.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
So that's very different. And yeah, towards like the regions restrictions, we have 2. In Hearthstone, I think you have only 1 if you would compare it to the classes. And in like MTG, you have your 5 colors, and you can mix them all up together. Like this is, I have a friend of mine, and he said that he was really missing that from MTG, because he was coming from that to mix all the regions together, because we have 10, which is the double from 5 from MTG, and you can only mix 2, which is kind of sad, but also obviously it's easy to understand that, right? You only have this one type of mana, so you could play anything, which would be really busted.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's be honest, though. If there was a way to combine every single region in Runeterra, we all know what's going to happen. It's going to be a rally deck with Blood in the Water, Golden Aegis, Relentless Pursuit, what's the other one? Scion, Shampoo.
Probably, yeah. All the rallies and Aurelia.
Exactly. But that's a really interesting point. One other thing about deck building that I remember hearing 2 years ago from a pretty big Hearthstone creator that always stuck with me was when Brian Kibler said that he liked Hearthstone more because he felt that in Runeterra the decks felt too much like it's about the champion. So every deck you build it around a champion, and it makes it less interesting to actually build decks because it has to function with that champion. And for a while I was like, yeah, maybe he has a good point. Maybe that's why I should go back to Hearthstone or something, right? But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made, because look at a champion like Draven. Just goes into every single deck. Back in those days, you also had champions like Kalista that was actually playable back then. It was best with They Who Endure, but she had other decks like Fearsome Archetype, etc., where it was just really good. Obviously, there are pushed archetypes, so I'm gonna guess that back in those days, Brian Kibler only played like I don't know, like Ezreal or something with Karma, and he felt like that was the only way to play them. And they didn't fit anywhere else because Tribeam didn't exist back then. But even back then, archetypes or champions rather, were versatile. And I'm going to be honest, with Worldwalker, Riot has really made deck building infinitely more interesting. You can say what you want about those champions, but they really promoted deck building and gave us like so many more options to actually make interesting decks and viable decks. Like look at Legion Deserter. I used to really, really strongly dislike Shadow Owl's Noxus control decks because every single card you play, or pretty much every single card you play, was a 2-for-1 to remove something. So I just never felt like it worked. But that completely changed now that you can play Viego and Legion Deserter to actually have win cons, so that it doesn't really matter if you're throwing out a little more cards than just straight up removing something with a vengeance, because Noxus has to activate stuff like Flock, Disintegrate, and that's just hard to do with Shadow Owls because they don't really have incidental damage, which Piltover does, or Build Sweater even. But getting an actual win con for that region combo is just so good. So
yeah, definitely.
Deck building is great.
But coming back to the point from your friend, I think there are also plenty of decks that don't even run champions. So I would partly disagree on what he said. I mean, he has some points, right? There's a reason why there's a limit to champions in the deck, because they are obviously more powerful than normal units.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of decks where you would just splash in a champion that's like good for your game plan, but not necessary to win per se. Like you already mentioned the They Who Endure deck, which was with Elise, and Elise, you wouldn't level her up and get a spider plan on.
Yeah.
Most of the time you would have your They Who Endure, and then you smack your opponent and kill him with a Trusty, finish him off. And you don't really need Elise for that. You need her for developing the bodies, but your game plan is actually the They Who Endure, not her.
Yeah.
So you don't really play around, you don't build around her per se.
Yeah, even in a spider deck, I feel like leveling Elise was good, but it was never like, okay, I built my deck to do this. Even right now, I've had it multiple times where I play against Viego Elise with Legion Deserter. They play Elise on 2, and on turn 3, they play House Spider and Valfeast, and they're Elise flipped. I'm like, okay, well, that kind of sucks, but I don't care. Like, okay, sure. Do you win now? No, not really. You become a little more powerful, but really, like, the fact that Elise loses the ability to summon a Spiderling is probably not even worth leveling her up, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, I think to an extent they could improve her archetype a little, like push the spider archetype by buffing her leveled up form and make maybe her level up a little harder, maybe one more spider, or I don't know, keep it two rounds or whatever, and make her like a really thick beast, because she still is a 4/3, like she doesn't even get more HP when she levels up, which is pretty terrible, because you can still get excited her for free. That doesn't feel good to play as spider decks. I was doing this in the past. I tried to use this archetype and how she was meant to play, so to say, with her spider shell that she has and all those spider follows. They're really interesting. But we end up often with losing to avalanches and stuff, and then you cry uncle.
Yeah. Buff Valmaw. The coolest spider card as nowhere to be seen. They even printed a landmark for the Valmaw. And okay, honestly though, slightly off topic, but the fact that if you proc the Twisted Tree Line, the Valmaw landmark, the fact that it doesn't even go on the stack attacking after you attack with 3 fearsomes, it's ridiculous. Like, what is the point even? Like, I don't know what they were thinking.
I think you already made a big video about bad landmarks, and this was definitely one of the set from the very bad landmarks.
Yeah, I don't think I mentioned that one, but it should have been an entire chapter just for that card. Like, come on, give Valmaw some love.
Yeah, totally signed.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can move on to the next point, unless you have anything to add to gameplay.
Maybe only the last 2 points that I wrote down here. So we have the limited board space that we don't have in MTG, for example. In Hearthstone, you also do have that, but the limited board space is something you don't have in MTG. But in a digital card game, obviously, it makes a lot of sense to have that. Only issue that I have with that is the landmarks, and I've talked about this in the past, that I don't really like that it takes away the space. And I think, like, gameplay-wise, it makes sense to an extent, but it feels very bad if you have cards and units that develop other landmarks, like the whole archetype around Talia, and also with the Thralls. Maybe in the meta right now, it's not so sad that you have this limited board space, but most of the time it feels bad to play your Lysandra and you don't get the Thrall out of it because your board is full.
Yeah.
In like more fair decks, I guess. And my point is that I think they should buff at least those very bad landmarks that are 5 mana or 6 mana, that they should get an extra slot in terms of the to make up for the heavy investment that you pay, and then it even has the downside of taking space from your board. So
Yeah.
maybe that's something to consider for the future, to have cards that bank, sort of say, your landmarks.
Yeah, I almost feel okay. This would be impossible to implement. I feel, but it almost feels like the landmarks with a passive effect, like Targon's Peak, like Grand Plaza, even Grey Apothecary that came out recently. I feel like those landmarks should not take up a board space. But I like that the countdown landmarks can take up a board space, even though with Thrall sometimes it does suck. But I feel like that is a good way to balance them. The passive landmarks really make no sense to me at all. There need to be a way to interact with them and remove them, obviously. So I don't know if there would be a way to implement that in that way. But I think countdown landmarks are just extremely well done, and they really make the game infinitely more interesting. But I think it's too little too late for that to really change at this point. I think we're stuck with what we have right now. And I'm also going to say that if Grey Apothecary came out when landmarks were initially released, it would be like a 4 or 5 mana landmark too. So that's why if they go back on stuff like a Vault of Helia, they could easily make that 3 mana. It wouldn't break the game. And even if it did, definitely. It's fine. Go back and make it 4 mana or something. Find like a happy medium, but 5 mana is just stupid.
Yeah, definitely. I was building around this card so many times, and I felt so many times. So
yeah,
the same amount of times probably.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah.
Even Noxrai Arena, they have so many sweet visual effects, and nobody will ever know.
Bummer.
Yeah.
And the last point that I wrote down was the Oracle's Eye, which stuck out for me in the very first days, that you can actually see what happens before you commit your play.
Yeah.
And this is especially for newer players is a beautiful thing. So I don't know if there's in Hearthstone implemented something like that, but in MTG, obviously I was playing this like cards, like real cards, like not digital. You obviously don't have an eye there what happens, but then you kind of have to know the rules anyways. So I guess the eye is also mandatory for how the right wording is sometimes for the cards.
Yeah, but, I guess with like how big a spell stack can get and how intricate combat can be, it's pretty good that we have an eye. In Hearthstone, it's turn by turn. So the only thing Hearthstone needs is like a good history, which they have. I think Hearthstone's card history is fantastic. Runeterra, you can't even see what card was created, which is just, it's unbelievable that that's not in the game yet, that you can't see if a card was created or not in the history. I think unacceptable almost. I would honestly consider that game breaking, especially during Bandle meta. The fact that I have to, like, even especially if a burst card is played, like if a conchologist makes a trinket trade, if I have to hover my mouse like over the card in the middle really fast to see if it was created by conchologist or not. If I'm not in time, I have to go to the history and check it, and it's not there. I don't know if that was a main deck trinket trade or if it was by conch. And that's just stupid. Leaving out information for the player like that is not okay.
Yeah, that definitely agrees. It goes on the same route, like maybe not so bad for the game, but there are still champions in the game that don't have a win line. It's unacceptable.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I guess winning with Hecarim is just not something Riot ever expected, so they just didn't give him a voice line, but non-intended behavior.
I think there's one other that I always miss.
Vladimir, right?
No, Vladimir does have one. I will come up later with it. I'll write it down in the comments.
Please do.
But yeah, take away the next big point, because gameplay was a really big chunk here. We talked about, we still have some points to go over.
Yeah, so champions and their allies. And then I think the most interesting thing about that is really level up animations and how cool and how much of an exciting moment playing a champion can really give. That's one thing that Runeterra does better than most other card games. Especially, I noticed this especially after collabing with Raran, who is a Hearthstone creator, and every time he plays Runeterra, like he streamed it like maybe 2 or 3 times now, every time a champion levels up, he's just like, oh my god, this is so cool. Why doesn't Hearthstone have this? Every single time. Like, he actually got Zed to level up, and he was like, this is the coolest thing ever. This is enough to make me switch games. And I agree with him. This is something Runeterra does extremely well. And I wish that cards like Campor, who have a really cool animation, even Ledros, like dropping his big sword, I wish some cheaper cards had that too, even though, you see those more often, so you don't want to give them like really big effects. But I don't know, like if you play a conch that was like played in almost every game, what if he dropped on the board, you'd see like some, I don't know, some footsteps or something, like something really minor just to make it exciting. Runeterra does that, but for some reason it's all like unplayable or way too expensive cards, and it's kind of a shame.
You do your signature card.
Oh yeah, exactly. What the? It's literally like a galaxy explosion or something. It's the coolest thing you've ever seen, but the card just never played. And honestly, maybe that is the reason they gave that to a card like that, because nobody's ever going to play it, so you're not stuck with it every single game. But it's kind of strange. There are so many beautiful level up animations, effects, and you don't get to see them nearly as often. And I think that if they happen a little more frequently, it might make the viewer experience a little better too.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it just makes so that cards come to life, right? It's not only the level up animations for the champions and the identity that I have. It's also the interactions between cards, like not only champions between champions, and we have that most of the time, but we also have between followers from different shells, so to say. So every champion would have their shell of cards. That also for newer players, it's really nice to have, as you know what synergy is good and what's not. So you have sort of a help as a new player to build your deck. Like you see the color scheme, or maybe you even see the champion on that follower, and then you recognize, okay, I should maybe add this follower there. And it's so flavorful as a whole. And yeah, it's still, I played this card, this game since beta, and I still have interactions that I haven't known yet every week or so. Every time a new or an old archetype pops off, and then you realize, oh, they have an interaction. What the hell?
Yeah, yeah.
You only
exactly.
see this because there was a buff to the card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I adore that. It's even like it's like really small feedback for the player too. It's like, oh, if Quinn talks to Misfortune, even though that one is maybe a little more out there, that is pretty obvious that they work well together. But if they talk to each other, it's like, oh, if these two characters talk to each other, maybe that means that they work well as a team together, and maybe that means that the deck is supposed to function this way. And it's just really small things like that. It just makes the game feel so good. Yeah, it's exactly like you said. Some cards just never see play, and then you put them in a meme deck. Like my favorite example is Arsenal and the Safety Inspector. Safety Inspector just never played, but when you play Arsenal with Safety Inspector on the board, he goes like, "Hey, Arsenal, what's with the big bomb?" Or he's like, "What's that on your back?" And Arsenal's like, "Oh, what, the giant bomb? It's a giant bomb, pal." It made my day when I heard that, because I've never played Safety Inspector before, and I'm like, okay, I gotta play this deck more now just because of that. And
I saw a reaction on your channel. It was glorious.
It's so good. I love it. I really appreciate that Runeterra does this, because Hearthstone. I keep bringing up Hearthstone because that's just the card I play, or the card game I played the most. Doesn't have that. They have cool animations and effects. Don't get me wrong, but no interaction between cards. So it's a miss. It really makes the card game and the champions and followers in it feel so much more alive. It makes the world that Runeterra is come alive.
Yeah, and I mean, they could even say, okay, we do this one interaction and we call it a day. But no, they actually have multiple interactions even, and multiple voice lines when followers or champions enter the board. And I think even every single card has an own voice line. Like there is no follower or champion, even if it's a monster, it will just or something. So it's immersive, like the card game is alive, and that feels really warm.
Yeah,
really nice.
it does. No card has one voice line either. They have multiple, and that makes it feel like so much more of an actual character in the world. They don't say the same thing every time. They say something different because they are alive, because they are a character, and because they are people that you should care about, or monsters, I guess. It's really well done. Matched by nobody in the card game genre, in my opinion.
Definitely, yeah, it stands out and makes it unique in a way.
Yeah,
and also maybe to go back to deck building here for a second. I think there are 4 card types. I don't think we have mentioned that yet. In other card games, it's for MTG, for example, it would be more, because it's just due to the nature of the game, because it's so, it's 30 years old.
Oh yeah.
To that point. So yeah, Hearthstone is Legends of Terra is 2 and a bit. So obviously there aren't that many card types, but like you mentioned in your big video, there are things to come, and there will be more interesting things to build a deck.
Yep. Yeah, like obviously the landmarks kind of stand out because they're more like their own thing. Like you have spells, you have champions, you have followers. and followers are generally like supports or support to the champion. Spells are interaction and support to the champion too, and landmarks are kind of like, they do their own thing. Especially the first ones that were released, I think they got a little better as time went on with the countdown landmarks. But yeah, for example, in Hearthstone they released the hero cards, which really, like, I think those, even though they were broken, they were really well done because they literally changed the character you're playing and gives you new effects. And that's not possible in Runeterra, but I feel like landmarks shouldn't be the end of new card types being invented. I have no idea what they could do. For example, if landmarks aren't something that's not on the board, but more like on the side of like something that's happening, if landmarks are going to stay on the board, then I feel like maybe a new card for Runeterra could be like a Hexite Crystal or something. I don't know, even though that's a card in the game, like the Arcane Orbs from Hit Show Arcane. That's just on the side and has a passive effect, or that changes the board you're playing on. I think that would be super cool. And there's definitely a lot of like areas to explore there for Runeterra.
Yeah, now that we were talking about it, I was coming up with a point. Maybe it's not an own card type, but maybe you have cards that you can only include if you have a certain region combination. Like
okay.
Maybe it would be more boring in terms of deck building because you're then restricted to those two regions. But maybe they can be a little more powerful and flavorful in what those two regions do together, and maybe reactivate old archetypes like they would do with other cards. But maybe that's a thing where you get a bonus for doing those two combination regions that normally maybe don't go together that often.
Yeah, that's a good point. Honestly, it's basically what they're kind of doing already by printing support, for example, for reputation. Like when they printed for Glory, that's honestly that's a Shurima Noxus card, right? That's where that card is good. But actually, like restricting it could be pretty interesting. And even though we're talking about printing new types of cards like that, they technically kind of did that with the Runeterra champions, with the Origin specifically, where it's like there's a passive effect like Jin with the fourth ability shooting the Nexus for 1, and Bard shuffling chimes every round start. That's the start of it, and I honestly really think that's a good direction. Even though I think that Bard and Jin were poor executions, because Jin is either meaningless because you either have healing and that one ping does nothing, or you're playing against a deck with no healing and that one ping will suddenly start stacking up really fast, and Bard is just RNG Fiesta. So again, I think there's a lot of room to do cool things that haven't been explored yet. But okay, that's not part of this video. That's not what we're talking about. We're comparing Runeterra to other games.
We want to love our game, not hate.
Yeah.
But again, we say it a lot, but we say it again. If you criticize a game, it's just because of the love for the game and not because you want to hate it to the ground. So I totally get your point, and I see it quite similar. Like I wanted to build like funny decks with Jin, and I wasn't capable of, because most of the time I would end up with just a burn deck, because his card pool just says build a burn deck, and it's kind of sad.
Yep, exactly.
Before we go to the next big point, I would like to, or would be interested in, you said you played Pokemon. How was the play pattern there, and maybe in regards to the points that we talked about already, like concerning gameplay, champions, like what is the general shell for people that don't know Pokemon like I do?
I mean, it's been a really long time. I played like really, like I had one deck basically that I knew the rules of. I honestly don't even remember how you. Okay, so with Pokemon, it's like evolutions, right? So you have Bulbasaur, Venusaur, or Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur. So you have to, before you can play your Ivysaur, you have to play Bulbasaur, and before you can play Venusaur, you need your Ivysaur.
Is there a mana system or like resource system, or can you just play your cards?
You can just play your cards, but it can only be like that the first of an evolution stage, as far as I know. And you need or I think it's called energy. Yeah, I think they're called energy cards to attach them to like a Pokemon so they can use a move that requires X amount of energy. And then once you do that move, you remove the energy, and you have to fill up that energy again with the cards, play them on it to do that move again. God, it's literally been like 8 years. I was so scared of being wrong about this, but that's the basic play pattern. I had like one deck that I played like once or twice in an amateur tournament, and besides that, I just theory crafted on like Pokemon Online, and I collected the cards. So I wasn't super competitive in that. I just liked looking at the cards, basically.
Yeah. Yes. So I don't want to torture you with that anymore. I was just curious because I think Yu-Gi-Oh does similar thing where you just play your cards and then that's it. And for me as an MTG player, like back in the day, I was playing MTG since I was 12 or something. And like my classmates would play Yu-Gi-Oh in that time and was like, well, it's for babies. Like you just play your cards. Like where are your lands? Where are your resources? How do you pay your cards? You can't just play them. Like that's not fair.
Yeah, I think with Yu-Gi-Oh there is some kind of summoning cost, but when I played that game back in like middle school or primary school, my English was so bad that I just ignored that with my friends. We just played by our own rules. We're like, oh, you want to play like your 2,500 attack Blue Eyes White Dragon? Go ahead, kill me. It's all good, but I'm pretty sure that's not exactly how it goes. But I'm not sure.
Probably not. Yeah, let's not talk about Yu-Gi-Oh because we obviously don't have any clue, both of us.
I did play Duelist though. Rest in peace. I don't know if you've heard of that game.
No.
Duelist was extremely good. It's a card game, but the board was more like a chessboard where you could move your cards like from place to place. And obviously, when you played your card, it looked more like an actual minion, and also had attack, defense. So it's exactly what you think it is, like with Runeterra, except you could move in 3D. It was really really good. Mogwai played it a bunch too, and I think he was semi well known for it, or just extremely well known. I'm not exactly sure. But that game died off sadly, and it had like the same system where you buy packs like Hearthstone.
Okay, cool. Buying packs like this was a perfect transition to the next topic, which is monetization. Is probably, in my opinion, the biggest point or the biggest so to say advantage of the game. Like if you look at other card games, it's just absolutely absurd how much you have to pay to get a proper deck at first, and then also to expand your collection to a point where you have all the cards. So for me, of Legends of Runeterra, I think I have all the cards since over a year. And in the first place, I wasn't playing all that much. Like I was playing the normal amount, like what's normal, but I guess like around 3 or 4 hours a day, like after work. And I wasn't like hard grinding 8 hours or 10 hours a day. And they really made it so it's really free to play. It's not like you have to invest money to actually get your collection. You have those starting packs, which help you a lot if you have none. But other than that, you don't have to spend a penny, really.
Yep.
I really adore that.
I would advise against spending any money on Runeterra unless it is to buy cosmetics. And I mean, I love the game, so if you want to keep it alive, do spend your money. You know, if you want to support the game, of course, do that. But you really don't need to. That's like you said, one of the biggest selling points of Runeterra. You just start playing, and you have a weekly vault that you can open every Thursday. And if I'm going to be honest, you play 1 or 2 weeks, and the second weekly vault that you open, if you played enough to actually get the level and the rewards to a high enough point, you will be able to build your first meta deck easily. And then every 2 or 3 weeks after that, you will be able to buy to craft another meta deck. And then there's also the fact that Runeterra had the standpoint of there are no bad cards in the game. Every card serves a purpose. Of course, a card like Dredgers is only good in deep, but it is very good in deep, but you're not going to play it in any other build for the deck, right? So, no bad cards. This is obviously not that true anymore because of power creep, which is a pretty natural thing for any card game to have. But that's another thing that if you start playing for the first time, you start building decks, just craft the generally good cards that you can put in multiple decks. And then the next time you want to build a deck, you already have those generally good cards that you don't have to craft again. So it really just kind of like feeds into each other that if you take the right approach, if you optimize your income of your resources, you are going to be competing against literally the top of the ladder with your own like meta decks that are not like slacking because you couldn't afford a legendary or a champion or something. That just doesn't happen. If you're good enough, you can compete with the highest of the ladder, and you won't be held back by your collection, which is something that I see a lot of people talk about. It's like, oh, it's so unfair. I just started playing this game and I'm already getting smacked by people that just put like their life saving into the game. But that's not true for Runeterra. It's really not. That will never, you can never blame your skill level on that.
Yeah, definitely not. like back in the day, I remember playing MTG, and I was a poor, what do you say,
Student? Or...
pupil.
Oh.
I was a student. Yeah, what was I saying? Pupil. I think pupil is also a term in that regard. Right? My English is terrible, and I had no money. Like this was my point. And in MTG, you have to pay a lot. Like you have those real cards, and you would pay a lot of money for only 15 cards of a randomized pack, and then you get one rare and I think 3 uncommons, and then a bunch of commons, which are mostly trash, which goes for I think a lot of card games. But yeah, you had that in real life as well. So you would stack up all your shitty comments in the big like bag where you just throw them in, and then when you wanted to have fun, you would just grab in there, and then you just put it on this deck, and then this is my deck. Just put lands in it and let's go. That was I was doing with a good friend of mine, and we had a lot of fun with it. But I'm getting off track. What I want to say is that it's very, very cost intensive. So you have those rare cards that you really want to play. They're really good. And you have to spend up to 20, 30, 40, 50 euros for just one card. And for all the cards, even more so. So I think the most expensive card in the MTG back in the day when I was playing was at 1,200 euros. And I think now it's tens of thousands already. But this is more because of the like collecting thing. Like it's still the same card that has a price. It's this very first card from the very first set back in the 90s. And if you have a misprint, it's even more money. So this is something else. But my point is that you have to spend a lot of money, and you also have to spend a lot of money for other card games, like Hearthstone, for example, as well. Like I was playing a lot of Hearthstone. I think back in the day even more than Legends of Runeterra other days, and I couldn't keep up. Like they would vomit out those expansions, and I couldn't keep up. Like every time I was trying to get those packs and get my cards those new cards that I was very curious about, and I couldn't play them because I would never draw them.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a problem with Hearthstone in particular because they have both packs, and they also have new expansions like I think 3 times a year. So you have to keep investing money to stay up to date, and power creep happens. So you can't just not buy packs and expect to compete. It just doesn't happen. An interesting aspect that virtual card games do well is a crafting system. So you can like save up or disenchant your current collection to be able to build a new deck, I guess. However, I think that a crafting system where you can disenchant your own cards feels extremely bad for the player. I think that is a horrible, horrible system, and honestly, it should never exist in the first place. So I'm very happy that Runeterra doesn't have that. Obviously, it can get away with it because they are much more free to play. But the fact that you have to destroy your own cards to be able to craft another, and you get like 1/8 of the value for it, what a horrible, horrible design decision. Who came up with that? Yeah. Of course, there is trading. If you talk about like real life card games, I guess, like actual paper cards. But crafting system is good, but not if you have to destroy your own collection for it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think one other really big thing is wildcards. This is also something that Hearthstone, I think, doesn't have, where you have just a sort of Joker card, and you want that particular card, and then you spend your wild card on it, and you just get it. And you don't have to get frustrated and open packs and open packs and open packs, and you just don't draw that specific card that you want to play.
Yeah.
You don't have any way. I think you can pay it with like normal money. Can you?
Yeah, you can get wild cards for actual money. Yeah.
In Hearthstone.
Oh, in Hearthstone. I actually don't think so. I think it's impossible to spend money to get a specific card you want. You have to buy packs, and that's another thing. Like, let's say I want to buy 7 packs on Hearthstone. I believe is 10 euros. Ridiculous pricing, honestly. 7 packs for 10 euros. I mean, okay, it's Pokemon is probably still more expensive and stuff, but the fact that if you don't get the card you want, you then might have to like disenchant that entire selection of cards that you just got just so you can craft 1 legendary. And honestly, you probably won't even have enough. Just it's awful. Ridiculous. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Like, but concerning pricing, like the only issue that I have is I do like spending money on cosmetics. Like you said, we love that game, and we want it to progress. We want the developers to put more time into that, getting new content. And if you have the money, why not spending it, right?
Yeah.
And the thing on champion skins is, I think they pushed it a little too far in that regard. I wanted to actually buy skins for champions, but I'm always holding back by the heavy price. I think you spend like 10 euros or something for one skin, or
pretty much,
or 8 or somewhere around that. And I was like, no, sorry, right, and not that big amount. Like those event passes, I think is perfectly executed. Like the bunch of stuff that you get for it, for paying this event pass, is just enormous. But this just champion skins, no.
Yeah, no, you're robbing yourself if you don't get the event passes. They're a lot of bang for your buck, like crazy amounts even. If I'm talking about champion skins, I like them, but I don't think they're executed well. I think if you look at cards from Gwent, I don't know if they're called prismatic or whatever. I played Gwent in Witcher 3, obviously, and I played a little bit when the game came out in the beta or something. But their cards look beautiful. You have like a layer on top of the card where you see like the character moving, and even the game that came out recently, Marvel Snap, does it so well. Like I think Marvel Snap, I didn't look into it too much, but I did a little bit of research, and they have different card styles. Like they have a pixel style, they have a cartoon style, they have a realistic style. You name it, and that's like you can open different skins for your card. So I would love to have a Zigstalia deck or something, and every single card would just be in like the Minecraft chip style, you know, the voxel chip or whatever, the voxel style. But if every single card has like 5 different variations, and you can collect like the one that suits you, man, that would be so amazing. I would love to personalize my decks like that, and I think they do that really, really well. So I think overall that skins and just prismatic styles in general in Runeterra are a big miss. I was going to say a bit of a miss, but it's just a big miss. It could be so much more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they sleep on that, definitely. Like even just including more colors. Like most of the time, prismatic is just so bluish and icy looking style.
Yeah.
I think champions are a little different because they are like goldish, but yeah, it doesn't fit to every region, right? Most of the time you want to craft Shadow Isles or the Freljord cards in prismatic because they look so awesome in that color or the color combination. But for all other regions, it's like, meh.
Yeah, I don't.
Let me have another color.
Yeah, I don't need to make my Shrima deck look more golden. They already do that just fine. Yeah, no, I agree. I would love to, instead of just like a foil, I would love to see a Gwent style or Marvel Snap style where the card is like actually alive, like as like an additional layer on top where it's actually like some movement or whatever. It would be incredible. Even something like what if there's a card where it's like a different art style, and for example, when your Chronobreak is attacking or hitting Nexus, he does a little animation where it actually like slams his fist or something. Super basic, but I feel like there's a lot of room to explore there. Like even Akshan with like his grapple hook shooting something, it would be incredible. But we have nothing like that, and instead it's just foil layer.
Mostly JPEG.
Yeah, exactly.
for champion skins.
Yeah.
I mean, they do this a little bit, right? They now have their skills will have different paintings. It's a beginning, but
it's nice that they did
it from end.
Yeah, agreed. All right, are we ready to move on to the next part? I think we covered everything from monetization, right?
Yeah, I think so.
One thing I do want to say before we move on to the next point is that I think Runeterra might honestly almost be too cheap or too free to play for its own good. This is something that's mentioned a lot, but people watch Hearthstone because people are playing with decks that they can't afford. And that's just not a thing in Runeterra. You don't have to watch a streamer because you can just play the deck that you want to play yourself. There's no fantasizing about, oh my god, what is it going to be like when I get my hands on this deck? What if I can finally play budget Shurima, or Wallet Shurima rather, because there were literally decks that had so many legendaries in Hearthstone that they were called Wallet Warrior. You probably remember that if you played back in the day, right? Like it was such an expensive deck to craft. Oh my god, I can't wait to see what it's like when I get to play Wallet Warrior. And that doesn't happen in Runeterra because at most you're gonna have 6 legendaries that are champions. So every single deck, unless you have a lot of epics, is gonna be around the same crafting cost. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. I actually want to bring up that point, and I forgot it. That I think as well, that's too generous, a little too generous.
Yeah.
Obviously, for me as some, yeah, the dude that doesn't want to spend money is pretty good, but in the end, it hurts a little the game overall.
Yeah.
Like, you have a goal, right? Some people just play to make the collection full, and they will reach that end pretty early. If you play consistently, maybe they could make it so that you get more attention for fulfilling those daily quests and not for like permanent gaming. Like those weekly chests are nice and all, but make it maybe a little weaker. Um, so, or maybe make it a little weaker the more cards you have. Like the moment
Yeah.
where you have all the cards has to have or needs to be harder as opposed to collecting your very first cards and get to play with your very first decks. I think this would lower frustration in the very first games, but will motivate you in the long run to actually have all the decks that you want to play and all the cards that you have in Runeterra.
Yeah, I'm sure that the devs think about this a lot, but I think that the main thing that the game could need is a green essence sink, just something to spend it on. And it might be good to make that sink be something enticing for players that don't have a full collection, so they could spend money on it, but still something that's meaningless enough that it's something nice to have for like people that have a full collection that they can still spend their green essence on, so that when a new expansion releases, that they can just instantly craft everything, right? I think that's the main
Mhm.
thing. When a new expansion is out, I craft every single card in it, and I will only use like 10% of my green essence, right? Um,
Same.
so there needs to be a sync. I think that's honestly, I mean, I don't want to say priority number one, but it should be a big priority for Runeterra to have something like that to actually keep players interesting in opening their weekly vault. Because right now for me it's Alt F4. I'm like, God, why do I have to sit through this animation? That's how spoiled we are. It's such a luxury problem.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to sit through 2 minutes of me getting free stuff. That's ridiculous. So yeah, that
But
could be
most of the time,
something.
it's only shards and wildcards. Yay, again,
Yeah.
10 more wildcards. I only have 290.
Yeah, it's like Scrooge McDuck throwing a coin into his money bin, right?
Hmm,
Who's gonna notice one more like a green wild card or 10 more green essence? It's nothing compared to the pile you already have.
definitely.
All right, that was that.
Getting it
Balance and
off the
meta
chest.
diversity. Oh, sorry. What did you
Hmm.
say?
No, I just said getting this off the chest.
Yeah, money sink or green essence
um,
sink, please.
hmm, Go for it, right?
Yeah. All right, balance and meta diversity. Do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, because this is also something that they wanted to address to an extent, and I think other games really struggle with that. Like always, I will say my example MTG there because it's one of the most prevalent ones, and they have this really big issue of not being a only digital card game. So once they have a new expansion and it turns out there's a card that's really broken, they have a really bad time balancing that because they can't balance it at all because you can't reprint, you can't just take back all the cards that are already bought in some random packs, and then you just like put an adding on it and rename it. I don't know. You can't do that, right? So
Yeah.
the only way that they have an out for that is banning the card, and then you can't play it anymore. At least in the standard tourneys, and yeah. So you have that restriction, and most of the time it feels bad. You don't want to do that. Like you invested a lot of time and money into it, developing this card, and you don't want it to be banned. So most of the time it just feels bad, and I forgot my point there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess even for a player, it feels bad because if you spend money on getting that card, and if you build a deck around that card, and then suddenly it's banned, it's like, oh, my entire deck is invalid. I wasted my money, and I can't even play the thing that I got excited about playing. So yeah, like you said, you can't just ask every player in a row, like, hey, please send your card in so we can, like change the text on it. Just doesn't work, and that's one really big advantage that virtual card games have. And for Hearthstone, that was a opportunity that they did not take for a long time. Like they went months, years, without doing any kind of balance updates. And I believe that their take on that was we don't want players that come back after a while of not playing to log into the game and find out that their deck that they have been enjoying suddenly doesn't work anymore. I know that Ben Brode, who left the game, really believes in that. I personally don't. I think more balanced update is better because if you do like a little text when the player logs in or like a link to something external, they can just look at the cards that have been nerfed and they can get a nice little dust refund, or they can just replace it in a deck, because honestly, a nerf that's done right is a nerf that will make the card worse but still playable, or at least keep the deck the way it functions intact. That's why you, I guess, don't really want to change something big like changing the speed of a spell, for example. That's almost a rework rather than a nerf. Like changing the pike spell speed from fast to slow is unacceptable in my opinion, and they should never ever even consider that, because it would change lurk just way too much and entirely change the way the deck is played. So Runeterra went through that same phase where they didn't really update that much in like 2021, I guess. In 2020 we got almost 2 or bi-weekly updates, and in 2021 we got almost nothing. They are coming back on that because right now we're getting really big patches every month, and it's beautiful. So they're finally taking that opportunity, or the fact that they are a virtual card game, to really make the most out of balance and how they can impact the meta with updates to keep it fresh.
Yeah, I can't be happy about that. And I go back to my point that MTG has a problem of there will be then maybe there is a card that is very, very good, and they don't want to ban that because of the reasons that I mentioned prior. And then this one deck will just dominate all the meta, and everyone will just play this one single deck, and you can't see it anymore. Like we had that in Legends of Runeterra, that a deck was prevalent for some weeks, and even that is very frustrating. And in MTG, you have this over a month even, until the card potentially gets banned, or it's people don't want to play it anymore because there's some new stuff to try out, or maybe there was a guy coming with a new combo which is even more broken, and you have no possibility whatsoever to balance that out. And that Legends of Runeterra has that is very, very good, and it's very, very healthy for the game, and it's very, very good that they finally addressed it, like you said.
Yeah, definitely. If they didn't do that, it's like, well, I guess you might as well be like a TCG. What is the official name? It's a virtual card game, and something like MTG is a.
Yeah, I think it's CCG because you can't trade.
Collectible card game.
It's a trading card game, and so it's a collectible card game. I had to learn that as well. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. So you might as well be that instead of a virtual card game then. Because then at least I have like a nice little binder I can open to look at all the sweet cards I've collected. Because I'll be honest, when I look at my Pokemon collection and I go through my binder, I'm like, oh my god, everything's so shiny. Look at this. I can't believe I got this card in 2014 or whatever. But I never go through my Runeterra collection to look at all the cards I've collected, because it's not nearly as prestigious. So I think that's another thing. If you are a virtual card game, make use of the tools that you have, because you are online and because you can do balance updates so frequently.
Yeah, definitely. Something that I wanted to mention is that solving the meta was one of the issues that I wanted to address, and I think that you don't really have any possibility to get around this entirely, because people are a lot. There are a lot of people on the internet that are trying out decks every single day, and they have a lot of time, some of them, and they would come up with the most broken combos within hours even. Sometimes it takes some weeks, but there will be a point where the meta is solved and where the people have this one single deck that has the best stats. We have online, you can see it, right? Which deck performs the best, and then okay, this is now the meta that formed, and we have that. So unless there will be some meme-ish thing that somebody would come up with later on the line, you would have the meta, and then it's solved, so to say. And this is why balance updates are so important, and why new cards are so important. So this is something you can't avoid, but you have tools to go around that, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. That's really all it comes down to, I guess. My first introduction to that genre was with Hearthstone, and the reason that I did like it so much was exactly because it's virtual. You need to use like your imagination, which of course is a big thing, and is why games like Pokemon are so exciting, because you've seen them in like the anime, and I guess with Magic too, it's like you see like a big dragon on a card, and you're like, oh my god, I can't imagine what this would look like if it's actually fighting those things. But in virtual card games, you have like all these animations, I guess, and I don't know, it's just exciting. You can create really exciting moments. So just slamming a card on the table and being like, oh, I win now. But yeah, that's not really much about balanced meta, but more like, well, what the benefits are of a virtual card game, which of course is balanced too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's another thing. It doesn't just go for nerfs, because I think the one thing that games like Magic and Pokemon do is like, if this card is too strong, ban it. Buffing cards, as far as I know, doesn't happen ever.
No, it doesn't. Like any balance whatsoever, nerfing or buffing.
Yeah, right. So they can ban cards, and that's the extent of it. That's all they do. But like in Runeterra, buffing one single card, or buffing it multiple times, like with Monetization, suddenly makes a complete meme deck just like a king of the meta. And I think that's really exciting, actually. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but I think that's a little bit narrow-minded, because if you don't like that, you just don't like that specific experience playing against that deck. But the fact that it is possible for a meme deck to suddenly become a king of the meta like that, or queen, in case of Lysandra with Thralls and Talia, is cool in my opinion. And I really like that they are open to doing that.
Yeah, I mean, why shouldn't everybody have the opportunity that his favorite deck would pop off at some point or another?
Yep.
So I was really happy for Monetization players. I wasn't a Monetization player myself that much, but I was really glad for others, and I didn't really mind it too much. Like, obviously, after some weeks, I was like, okay, I gotta watch the movie again. But in the end, really, I would just lay down or not play the game, not so frequently, and about some weeks, and then there would be another buff, nerf patch, and then we have another shooken up meta.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I agree. If I don't feel like watching the movie, I just concede before the movie pops off, and then my opponent is stuck watching it, and I can just go next game. Have fun with your 2-minute cutscene that you so badly wanted. I'm gonna move on with my life. I've seen this movie 100 times already. I know how it ends. But yeah, that's it's amazing. I know that having that kind of experience against a specific deck that you just cannot beat, and that's way too strong, is very frustrating. Especially in the case of Monetization, where it was a bit of an uninteractable combo deck in essence. Because once the combo goes off, you basically have no way of winning. I mean, there are some ways, of course, but it's hard because it's so powerful what they do. It's basically like a Furo win con where it just ends the game. But that's just Monetization. I don't want them to stop buffing underplayed cards just because they're scared of another Monetization incident. Let's call it that. Please throw another buff at Reputation, because even after all those cards, even after Grey Apothecary, For Glory, the buffs to Bone Crusher or whatever, LeBlanc, whatever, they still need more.
Tactician also.
Yeah, the Tactician, right. They need more, and I hope that doesn't stop them. Even now, when they release 2 cards for Thralls, which made the deck way too consistent, way too strong, please, keep doing it. We are stuck playing against a very frustrating deck for maybe a month, but we know that Runeterra cares enough about the game to come back a month later, make balance adjustments, and put the deck in a more balanced state, and then who knows, maybe the next meme deck will be a little bit too strong, but just come back a month later and change it up again, because I prefer a diverse meta every month over a balanced meta that's the same for half a year.
Yeah. It sounds pretty good. Yeah. And this is also something to point out, I think, as a big difference to other card games. Like, the meta diversity is so high. Like, there were those dark days, I see earlier, but most of the time you would just go on ladder and you face so many different decks. Like, obviously there will be this one good deck that maybe is Thralls right now, and then you get a little frustrated, but like 9 out of 10 games, at least from my experience, I've faced very diverse cards or metas, or not metas, decks, especially if you are like in the lower tier from some maybe Diamond or lower Masters. People will experiment, and this is for me the most fun, to face diverse decks and also to test your own deck against diverse other decks, because this is what a card game is about, right? It's like this whole very not the same thing every single game, right?
Yeah.
Experience.
Yeah, I almost lost to a Thresh Gangplank with Watcher of the Isles today. I loved every second of it. I really did. I was like, I'm heading over. I was playing a nab deck, so I was like, I'm gonna do some real-time nabbing. I'm gonna go to Runeterra AR and nab this deck so I can play it tomorrow. I love that. Diversity is so good. Sweet decks that are able to hold their own are beautiful, and The only way to keep that going is with these type of balance updates.
Definitely. Okay, we're in quite a bit of time, so I think we should actually go to a conclusion and to answer those questions that, or the one question that we posed at the very beginning. So, did they live up to the goals from the four main things that have problems with CCGs? So, I want to ask you, maybe with the first one, is the paycheck to try a new deck, is this a thing that they solve within Legends of Runeterra?
Absolutely, yes. With flying colors in more ways than just one. They don't just give you cards, like they don't just hand it to you. There are through one way that's in the game, but they do it through multiple ways. There is wild cards, there's your weekly vault, there is region roads, there was expedition. There are so many ways to get cards. If you care about Runeterra, if you play the game, you will get decks frequently, and you will be able to craft meta decks every 2 weeks at least.
Nothing to add there.
Great. All right, so the next is there is super high RNG to the side games. How do you feel about Runeterra in that aspect?
Well, back in the day, I would say they definitely solved that. But with the time, as Bandle City came up, especially, and other things, it was feeling a little worse. Mm-hmm. But we're way far from a point where I'm saying, oh, this RNG is totally killing the game. Mm-hmm. So, and the thing is about RNG, it has two coins of or two sides of the coin, right? Mm-hmm. It feels really funny a lot of the time. We have it with ARAM, for example. We have it with this new Toot game, this gramophone thingy with the 7 mana.
Oh, yeah, the song spinner.
Yeah, exactly. Which is totally all over the place. But you have at least a little bit non-randomness as you pick one of two, I guess. Yeah, but you can totally high roll, you can totally feel bad about it. And this is RNG for you. So while it's fun, it can be toxic as well. And I think they're still in a moment where they have a good balance between those two.
Yeah. Yeah, I think honestly RNG is in a good spot. There are RNG cards, but I think all of them do it fair with one single exception. And that's Reggie. I want him to burn in hell. The Pharaoh's Financier. I hate that card so much. I think that the fact that it can manifest a 6+ cost card that can end the game is so disgusting. I really hope he gets nerfed. At this point, I think he is more like offensive to me in regards to Runeterra than Conch ever was. I hate that card.
Yeah, probably fair point. Like, one of my favorite decks was the Undead Inventors list with Jason Heimerdinger, and I was playing the full set, and most of the time he was giving me that game-ending card.
Yeah.
But it was really fun to pull out a Glorious Evolution that wasn't main decking, and then I could go off with that, and all my tech cards, or my cards would go tech cards, and my 3-drop that buffs all tech cards +1/+1 would just pop off in that very moment. Yeah, I love those moments. I can't deny that. So
no, you're right. But you can also main deck your Glorious Evolution. See, I get upset when I'm about to win a game against an Ezreal Annie, and then they play Pharaoh's Financier, and they get a Song Spinner with a leveled Ezreal on board, and suddenly I'm dead from 8 HP. I don't know. No, thank you. But what you just mentioned, that's fantastic, and I live for those moments. Those are the highlights, for sure.
Yeah, but fair point. With Ezreal always feels bad.
Yeah.
At least after the big buff that he got. But we rambled on that enough last podcast. You can check that out. To go to the next thing, the metas are solved way too fast. What do you think about that one?
I think that's still a little bit of a concern, but not really. I think there are exceptions. I think, for example, this meta actually got solved fairly quickly. Even though we got 4 new cards and cards for older archetypes, I still think that it was solved a little bit too quickly. I feel like after a week of playing, the meta was settled. Okay, so you can consider a week fast or slow. I think in Hearthstone terms, a week is actually fairly slow for a meta to get solved, but in Runeterra, I feel like that is not the case. I remember metas where 2 or 3 weeks later, suddenly a new deck would pop up that would just take the meta by storm. Like, for example, with it was Sivir Z back in the day, like that deck just came out of nowhere, like 3 weeks after an expansion, and it just ruled the meta. It was literally like tier S++. And there's many more examples like that. So I think right now it comes and goes. I guess it depends on what the player base is like, but yeah, metas do get solved fairly quickly, I feel.
Yeah, like I said prior, you can't really navigate around this.
Yeah.
There's way too much data on the internet. There's way too many communication within the community, which is obviously a very good thing, but it leads to very quickly solved matters.
Yeah.
And I felt like back in the day when Swim was doing decks, it was even faster. So you can say about him what you want, but he was a really good deck builder, and he would build the most broken decks very often. And the meta was very quickly solved, and people would go Mobilitix, pick that one deck, and then they play that.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I gave a Runeterra example, but I don't think this is a Runeterra problem. They made that point, and well, I think it's fair that they want to try to solve it. And honestly, they probably did a better job than most other card games. It's still not something that's solvable for a card game. Not in this day and age.
Probably not, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's not really a Runeterra thing, but can't have it all, I guess. But the last point, cards that stay broken way too long. What about that one?
I would say cards stay very unbroken for way too long. This is my main concern. So I want to play underplayed cards. But in terms of that cards stay broken too long is a fair point to an extent. We talked about 2021, where there was a time, especially we can't come up with every single podcast, I guess, Azir was broken for way too long, in my opinion. They should have done something about it with hotfixes, and there were ways with it. Maybe they had a bad time within their developer team. Maybe they didn't have the resources to pull it off. I don't know what happened there, but this was a problem, and I had a bad time with it. I can't neglect that. So while this was a thing, I will say that cards stay not broken for very, very long. So they learned with the time. They will do very frequent updates now, and this feels just glorious. So I have a very awesome time right now in Runeterra, and I'm hoping that stays that way.
Yeah.
For the foreseeing future.
Same here. I think they did a great job. They really stepped up from last year. They stayed true to their promise, and I honestly, nothing but respect, and I couldn't ask for more. So great job on that point, honestly. It hasn't always been that way. There's something to say about the fact that they said that in 2020. They kept their promise, and then in 2021 they just completely dropped it. But at least, I mean, I guess every game, every team of developers just goes through that, and at least they're recognizing that was a problem and they're picking it up. So I have nothing but respect for that. It feels great as a player.
Totally. And this is why Legends of Runeterra is our favorite game, after all.
And it probably will stay that way for many years to come. Forever, most likely.
Forever.
Ever.
Okay, I think we're through. We have done it.
We're true.
I do want to end, because I want also to give credit to Rainmaker from Runeterra CCG, who wrote a really good article. You should read that one. I will link it down below. It's from the 30th of May this year, so not very old. And he was talking about the gameplay features, so sort of a wrap-up of the game. And he wrote something down here that I wanted to quote here. Many viewers praised LOR for its innovative gameplay design, generous card equation, system, and in-game economy, as well as rich world building. Since its first release in 2020, Legends of Runeterra keeps growing and evolving, supported by a passionate community and caring developer team. It's a game that any strategy fan would surely come to enjoy once they give it a real chance. This sentiment stands today as true as ever.
Beautiful. Honestly, very well put. Definitely check out the article. All right. And with that, I think we're going to say our goodbyes, and we're going to look forward to episode 11. We've talked about a few different topics that we want to discuss in the next episode. It might be a little bit of a more personal one, which is something people have been asked for. And I think as a podcast, we should be allowed to do that kind of thing because in the end, it's just two friends talking to each other about a game we love. But that goes beyond just a game at this point, since we are 10 episodes deep. But again, if there are any suggestions, anything you would like to see from us, if you want us to look at a deck you've made, want us to optimize or talk about it, or any other idea at all, please let us know. We have a mail address that will be down below. You can also just leave a comment, reach out to us on Discord. Anything goes, really. We want to make this a podcast that will go the distance, and we want to keep innovating stuff too, and just talk about anything that you might find interesting and that we find interesting.
Definitely. Thanks a ton for sticking up to this very moment. We are over an hour in it and you're still with us. So thanks for that. Check out all the stuff below. Let us know what you think. And yeah, what more can we say then? We see you guys on the next one.
See you next time. Stay legendary.
Stay legendary.